to a technical faux pas, I want to admit on my part. I am not with my partner, Ken Rosato, who hopefully will be able to join us in a little while, although he's out there in cyberspace somewhere. I just can't get him up on the screen.
Mhm.
But the thing is that we have Chuck Lesnick, who is a candidate for the second time for Yonkers City Council President. This is a job that Chuck had, uh, forgive me, Chuck, was 8 years ago?
No, so I actually served from 2006 to 2013. So I've been out for 12 years. At the time, term limits were 8 consecutive years, and then you had to take a break. So I could have come back anyway, but now they've changed term limits from 8 to 12 to 16 years. So effectively, there are no term limits. I can run and conceivably serve 16 more years. I'd be older than Joe Biden. I'm not going to do that. I'm just looking to come back because right now, I think the city is going to hit some turbulence and they need some experienced leadership. And I've been through guiding Yonkers through a recession. I was there 2007, 2008, 2009 when we got through that lack of federal funds, lack of state funds, etc. So, hopefully I have the experience to guide us again.
Well, turbulence is the understatement because apparently Trump just yanked the federal funding for sanctuary cities, and how how are you going to navigate through that if
I was right now. I happen to be in Washington D.C. at the annual Congressional Cities Conference for the National League of Cities, which is something I started doing in 2007, and really come down here every year to learn about best practices, and we advocate for municipalities all over the country. In fact, I'll be meeting with George Latimer tomorrow in my capacity here. And the discussion we just had at the first tier suburbs meeting, Yonkers is a first tier suburb right out of New York City, was how to deal with the unpredictability of a federal budget, where this is not the first time the administration announces something and then either the courts force them to retreat or public opinion forces them to retreat. They retreat and then they go forward in a slightly different direction, causing chaos and and acrimony. And one of the things in a bipartisan manner that we have to do is recognize that we have the government that we have because elections have consequences, and we have to deal with them where they are. And that is to do the things that are efficient, to do the things that meet their current priorities, but also meet the priorities of our constituents. And whether that's with housing, money from HUD, and so far, Scott Turner was one of the few people in the HUD, in the Trump first administration that was now designated to be HUD secretary, doesn't want to take apart the department he's been tasked with leading. He was a big advocate for the Federal Opportunity Zones program, which is something I'm very much involved with. So I'm hoping that HUD money will stay in. I'm hoping that even if they change the Department of Education and its focus, the federal money will still come through to the states, but we have to ready ourselves just in case it doesn't. And that's why I'm running on a campaign of experience.
well, I hate to belabor the point, but I mean, we may be headed for some dire consequences because Mayor Spano issued a statement this week encouraging people to uh, write, call, petition their local, uh, their congressperson, I should say, because the federal cuts are going to affect the police department, the Department of Education, housing, I mean the whole McGill, so to speak. And
Very appropriate word since Purim is this week. But the important thing here is to remember that while George Latimer is Yonkers congressman, and he really has been advocating very much in our favor, Westchester County has two congressmen, and the other one is Mike Lawler, who's a member of the president's party. And we have to get those cards and pressure going to Mike Lawler as well. He may have goals and aspirations beyond just his congressional district, and he needs to be responsive to the citizens of Yonkers too. And maybe through Lawler, we could get this SALT, the state and local tax deduction, raised or eliminated altogether. And maybe we can get more federal funding for the things that we care about, education and housing.
but is there a fail-safe plan if the bottom falls out? And what
Well,
is
the
your
bottom's going to fall out one of two ways. One is through these spending cuts and uncertainty, and the other is through a recession. And everybody says that these tariffs are very recessionary, and that's going to cause the economy to slow down. All those strides that Biden made bringing it back are going to be lost, and that's going to affect Yonkers in several ways. People are losing their jobs. Not as many as my colleagues in the Capital District region, where so many federal employees are losing their jobs. But a lot of people are losing their jobs. People have government contracts. People are working federal government. And as the price of goods becomes higher, people stop shopping. There's less sales tax. Yonkers makes a lot of money off of sales tax on things that are bought and sold in our city. And we get a percentage of that. The county gets a percentage of things sold in the county. The state gets a percentage of things sold in the state. And all that money goes to fund education and other things from the state. So we need to be able to tighten our belt a little bit, and we need to advocate.
A lot of this revolves around the issue of Yonkers being a perceived, I say perceived sanctuary city, because there's never been an official declaration. But you know something, frankly, if it looks like a duck, if it walks like a duck, it is a duck. So, is Yonkers, in your opinion, a sanctuary city?
Look, the mayor has been very strong in defense of immigrants, and I would be too, because so many Yonkers residents are immigrants themselves, children of immigrants, or in my case, grandchildren of immigrants. We all have roots in the immigrants community. We have to protect our immigrants. I recently sponsored a family from Mexico, and I see through their eyes the fear they have, even though they have legitimate green cards, of going to simple places like Home Depot because they hear that Mexicans are being rounded up, or shopping on Main Street because they hear that people are going into the Mexican stores. They're even a little bit afraid to send their kids to schools or go to the hospitals, and that can't be. So we have to protect our immigrants. And whether that's, calling ourselves a sanctuary city or just using common sense and requiring that not just an ICE warrant, but rather a judicial warrant is required before the Yonkers police cooperate with ICE. We have to take those steps. And, I can't get into the president's head about who he's going to exact retribution from today. Today it might be Barnard College, tomorrow it could be Sarah Lawrence College if they have a protest on campus that doesn't go his way. And while I may have feelings about the substance of what people are protesting, we can't let substance get in the way of First Amendment rights either. People have the right to First Amendment. On the other hand, the federal government is wielding this big stick saying, we're not going to fund you. We're going to cut out medical research. Everybody was complaining that the Democrats didn't stand for that young man who had cancer at the State of the State. Well, it's hard to stand for a president who just gutted cancer funding for childhood cancer research. Now he has a prop. He has a kid who's standing up there. But the real thing is you need to have some stability and predictability. And that's the message we're trying to send to Washington here this week in Washington, which is we're your partners, we're your allies in government, and we need predictability and we need stability. And state your goals. We'll try to work with you, but we need predictability. We can't have this uncertainty and these mad pendulum swings.
Okay, but I still wanna I still wanna expand a little bit on the sanctuary city concept, because there are populations across the country very similar to Yonkers that have some issues about the migrant population. For example, in Chicago, and I don't know about Yonkers, but food pantries that were traditionally used for poor Chicago residents are being usurped is probably too strong a word, but are being shared by migrants. And a lot of the local population is saying, well, wait a second, we were able to get our bread, our food handouts, and now it's being uh, replaced by other people.
Well, that's the worst thing. When government starts pitting people against each other, it's not the new Mexicans against the Guatemalans against the African Americans who have been here for generations. That shouldn't be the fight. The fight should be the people against the billionaires. If Musk and Bezos and Zuckerberg only paid their fair share in taxes, we wouldn't have these crises of Social Security and Medicare and all the funding shortages. And what's happening is they're trying to shrink what they're giving and then pit everybody who's a receiver of those funds against each other. And I'm not going to fall for that. I'm not going to get into that. Yonkers has an obligation to serve the people who are here. For a while, we had an additional obligation because we had migrants that were being shipped up from Texas into New York City, and there were some coming up here. They were staying at the Ramada, just a few blocks from my house. I never felt any pain or suffering because I was a few blocks from the Ramada. It didn't adversely affect my quality of life, but they would try to make you fearful of these people, and that's unfortunate. But they're gone now. They're back in the city, and there was a settlement where the city of Yonkers was able to get some fines because of the way the hotel had been run, which was essentially a fine, payment for the money they had put out because these children had a right to go to school. And again, whether they're in this wave of migration or whether they came because they had temporary protective status and then the administration took that away and then gave it back and then took it away and then gave it back, or whether they did it like my friends did with a legitimate green card. People are here. We have an obligation to educate the children. We have an obligation to make sure nobody goes hungry. We also, what happened during the pandemic when people who were poor and didn't have medical treatment got sick and then they gave the germs to other people. We don't live in a vacuum here. So, if somebody's going to get COVID, if somebody's going to get sick, everybody needs to be treated.
I mean, but at the same time, I'm going to move on to another topic. There were in excess of 100 calls from the Ramada where YPD, Yonkers Police Department, had to go and intervene. So it, it was it was a blessing for those people to have a place to stay, but it also was a place. It had consequences, um, and so it wasn't totally fail safe. What you didn't see didn't mean that it didn't exist. So
No,
it,
you're very right, and you can't put that many people without resources. After all, they were thrown up at the Ramada, but they weren't given enough food. They had to go out and work. There was competition, and as a class of people, the immigrants tend to commit crimes less than non-immigrants. Part of it is because they're fearful that they'll be deported, but in general, people are people, and especially when you're not giving them the ability to earn an income, you're going to have problems. So I'm glad that that problem specifically is not in Yonkers right now, but we have to guard ourselves against the next one.
okay. There now, you previously worked for Andrew Cuomo.
Yes.
You were his Westchester representative, I believe.
So, the funny thing is, my first job out of law school in 1985, I was a regional representative for Westchester, Rockland, and Putnam for Mario Cuomo. And I did that for 3 or 4 years. And Andrew was part of the administration as an unpaid, well, actually, he got $1 a year, advisor to his father. And one of the projects we worked on together was the West Help project, where we got public approval for West Help facilities in Greenberg and Mount Vernon. And that's actually why I ran for office in the first place, because there was a county legislator giving us a hard time about that, and he didn't even have one in his district. So I've been working with Andrew on this for a long time. I worked with Andrew at HUD for a number of years in the New York City regional office on the whole continuum of care, and as an economic development specialist, working with CBDG, Community Development Block Grant Funds, and then I brought some of that expertise to the city of Yonkers when we set up the first Section 108 program. When I left being city council president due to term limits, I went back to the state and became deputy counsel for the Office of Rent Regulation and assistant commissioner there, and served as counsel to the Westchester, Rockland, and Rent Guideline Boards. And in that capacity, Andrew had asked me if I would fill in as his regional rep for Westchester, Rockland until they found somebody to take the job on a full time basis. And eventually, Brian Heck took that job, but it was about two and a half years that I did it on a temporary basis, waiting for him to come on board, waiting for him to find the right person. So I had the experience of working for Andrew as a regional rep while I was still working as a assistant commissioner, deputy counsel for HCR.
Wait, this is at the risk of sounding like an HRA person.
Yeah.
if Andrew, if Andrew becomes the next mayor of New York City, and you become the next Yonkers City Council president, would you be able to hold dual hats? In other words, would you be able to work with or for Andrew while you are working as Yonkers City Council president? You sort of have like you have a
So,
dual.
so the answer is this. I retired from HCR, Homes and Community Renewal, in 2019 because at the time my father-in-law was 93 and needed a little help with his property management company. And I came in, we helped restructure some things. We sold a building, we're about to sell another building, and we put some of the proceeds into the Federal Opportunity Zone program, which, as I said earlier, was the only bipartisan part of the Trump tax code. It was put forth by Cory Booker and Tim Scott to try to get people that had capital gains to invest in distressed areas. So I haven't been working for the state since 2019. And while I, wish Andrew and everybody else running a lot of success in New York, both Mayor Spano and I have very strong ties with him, as well as some of the other people in the race. And it's very important for Yonkers, the third largest city in the state that borders on New York City, to have a direct relationship with the mayor of New York City. So the way it looks right now, he's doing very well with the polls. They have ranked choice voting in New York City, so they might win on the fifth or sixth ballot. We do not have that in Yonkers. We do not have campaign finance reform in Yonkers, which we should have, which would make this a much more level playing field. But it'll be interesting because we'll be running our races at the same time. We both have a June 24th primary. So this area, because we're in the New York City media market, will be uh, a little bit more activated because there'll be a lot of media ads for the primary. So probably the turnout will be little bit higher in Yonkers for a council president than it might otherwise have been.
How would Andrew's uh, being mayor of New York City help Yonkers?
Look, anybody who's going to be mayor of New York City is going to have is going to have New York City first and foremost. But there are a lot of things that we can cooperate on. For instance, New York City has a bus garage on Alexander Street
Right.
that really shouldn't be there, and it's a nice, several acre piece of property that should be moved. And I know I've talked a few times to the city of New York when I was council president about where else can that go? And they sort of put it back on us and say, we acquired that from Liberty Lions when we, dealt with George Bernaccia back in the past, and that's our property. You want us to move somewhere else? Find us another property. And there are some marginal benefits to Yonkers in that the express bus that starts in downtown Yonkers goes into New York City. And maybe if that garage was somewhere else, it might not start in New York City. But Yonkers is pretty well serviced by transportation with the Metro North and other express buses. So we should find another location for that garage. It's not efficient for them to be on. It shouldn't necessarily be Yonkers' responsibility to do that, but it would be nice to have a mayor to cooperate. There's always an issue of like where do homeless shelters go, and often they put them in the Bronx so close to Yonkers. They're in Woodlawn, and they're right butting up against Yonkers. And again, we're not opposed to the city of New York doing a reasonable distribution of the stuff that they have to do for their responsibilities, but we don't want them taking things that are perceived as unpleasant or bad for the neighborhood and putting it really on the property line. It's like having a bad neighbor who puts a compost heap or a chicken coop or something right on your property line. You want to have it, put it somewhere in the middle of your property. Don't put it on the edge.
Now, there's the affordable housing, affordable housing, affordable housing, which seems to be the mantra of every politician that has run for office in New York City, in Westchester County, in Yonkers. And there seems to be a misperception about affordable housing because a lot of people think that affordable housing means that if you have minimal income, that there should be some sort of urgency to build affordable housing. But it's more for doctors, nurses, not doctors, nurses, but firemen, uniforms, services people, school teachers, middle income. So, but how does that fit in terms of the people who are lower income and really need housing. I mean, you got a situation now, Palisades Towers, which hasn't had gas stoves working for going on, I think it's 4 months, which is ridiculous.
Well, there's a lot of things that are unpacked in that statement. Number one, affordable housing has not always been the mantra of Westchester politicians. If you remember the 1985 housing desegregation in Yonkers, it was because a bunch of council members didn't want housing anywhere in Yonkers, affordable or any other type of housing that would help low-income people. Secondly, is that there's a whole range of housing, and we sometimes call it affordable housing, sometimes we call it workforce housing, sometimes called low-income housing. It's generally based off the AMI, the annual median income for a given area. And in Yonkers, we're part of Westchester County, so we look at what would it cost a person, what would it cost a family of four to live in Westchester County with a certain annual median income of whatever it is. It might be 70,000, it might be $80,000 a year. Again, we're talking about two income couples. Then you start figuring out, okay, if I'm building, whether it's home ownership or rental, for somebody at the 100% AMI rate, well, how much do I charge in rent? That might be, $2,200 a month in rent for a one bedroom, or it might be higher, it might be a little lower. Is there affordable housing option, home ownership? Maybe for $400,000, you could build something where somebody can live. It's always better to, have some stake in the matter, some skin in the game if you're a homeowner. So then you have the question about whether you have a deep subsidy or a shallow subsidy. So some people advocate we have to subsidize down to people who make 30% of the AMI or 50% or 70% of the AMI. And unless you're having government resources go in, you're going to have a cross subsidy from the project. So sometimes you have a project like an 80-20 tax credit project where 80% is market and 20% is affordable. Well, if the market is strong, then you can subsidize more deep on the affordable side. If the market is just barely higher than the affordable side, you can't necessarily do that. The waterfront apartments tend to have a higher market than something that might be 3 or 4 blocks in from the water, just because of desirability and where it's located. So those were the discussions that we used to have on the Yonkers City Council is, do you have a deeper subsidy for fewer people, or do you have a shallow subsidy for more people? You can help more people if you're building to 80% of the AMI than if you're building for 30% of the AMI. So those are the decisions we have to make. But I will say that until I was on the city council, until we had the first Democratic majority in the city council, we did not have an affordable housing ordinance, period, that covered the southwest quadrant of the city. There was the court-ordered affordable housing that required housing in the other three quadrants of the city, northeast, northwest, and southeast, but it specifically exempted southwest Yonkers. And we came in, Patricia McDowell and I proposed a 20% affordable housing requirement. We were able to settle on 10. And, we settled because we wanted something on the books. And we again had a fight about whether certain projects were grandfathered in or not. But at this point, nothing is grandfathered in. It's a 10%, but we'll probably have a proposal to move it to 15 or 20 again. There'll be a discussion depending on what the makeup of the council and the mayor is. That will determine how far we can go and whether certain projects are grandfathered or not. But the good news is that there's more and more housing being built, and whether it's 10% or 15%, it's still a larger number than if no housing was being built.
Well, I mean, you referenced Southwest Yonkers, which is being gobbled up by developers. I mean, you can't find, you're hard pressed at this point to find an empty lot in Southwest Yonkers, which is a vast difference from 10, even 5 years ago. High rise.
Well, that's in part because of the successes we made. I mean, when I first became city council president, 52% of the people in the public schools were graduating and going to college. And that was good compared to Rochester, Syracuse, Buffalo, and Albany, our fellow Big Five cities. But it was terrible compared to the rest of Westchester, where Scarsdale and Chappaqua were in the 98, 99, 100% rate. Now we're up to about 92%. Many of the changes that we started back then took a while to trickle through the system. And again, it's been 12 years. I haven't been on the council, but I have been members of the Parks Board. I've been part of some of the successes of the administration. And again, you don't get everything you want. I'm when Mayor Spano was mayor and when Phil Amicone was mayor before that, I voted 95, 96% of the time in support of the mayor's proposals. But there was always 3 or 4% of the time that there were things that needed pushing a little bit. And I always voted for the budget. I think it's a sign of leadership to vote for a budget and to get a budget you're comfortable with. One of the people running for city council president now would, from time to time, vote against the budget. Well, I mean, that's okay if you're a rogue council member and you're not getting what you want in the budget. But if you're a council president, I think it's your job to craft a budget that you're comfortable with and then vote for it, not to take the easy way out and let everybody else do the heavy lifting and then vote against it and say, well, I had nothing to do with that tax increase. And by the way, I never voted to break the 2% property tax from the time it was implemented when I was city council president, nor did I ever vote to raise my salary, nor did I ever vote to extend term limits. And I did support campaign finance reform, which has not been implemented, but I would not be opposed to a change in term limits if you implemented that as well.
Well, you reference your opponents, and you're in a crowded field now. I think the number is up to five. You
On
have
the Democratic side, and there are still 2 or 3 Republicans that want to run. And I think it's very important to know that I was the first Democrat to beat a Republican to become city council president, and I was able to be reelected. I was the only Democrat, in fact, the only council president to be reelected to a 4-year term. Because I was doing a good job, and I probably would have been reelected again had we not had term limits then. So it's important to be progressive enough to change the city, but moderate enough to get elected and to get things done.
But this time it may be different because you have a Republican, you have two Republicans, I think, and you have a also some candidates that are less progressive. And right now there seems to be a political turn where people are not favoring progressive candidates as much as they were before. So how do you move people more to your side?
So I just need to put out my record and my vision. And the nice thing about having 3 council presidents in this race and 1 incumbent council member is we all have a record. I mean, there's one other guy who's running who has the same last name as the mayor, but has never been in office. And should he get his petitions and be on the ballot, he'll be running without a record. But and the Republicans don't have a record because they haven't been in office. None of the Republicans that are running, but for those of us who have, and the battle is for June 24th, because I really believe we're a democratic city and we're going to win this thing, is to show our record and show our vision. And I'm not going to get involved in any negatives about any of my opponents, other than to just put out my record and perhaps contrast it to the record of others.
Well, you will you will continue to run a clean campaign as you always have, Chuck. So I know that you're in Washington D.C. right now and you are out there hustling to get the job done. So I'll give you the last word on this.
Well, I really appreciate that because there were a lot of things that I learned at this conference in terms of best practices, but there's a lot of things that we have taught too. For instance, Yonkers led the way with daylighting the Sawmill River, and I was very proud to have partnered with a Republican mayor and both a Democrat and a Republican governor to get that done. And that was a catalyst in prompting more economic development downtown. It was also a huge help for the environment, bringing back species that we hadn't seen in downtown Yonkers for a long time. I was big on landmarks when I was council president, and my biggest fight with the previous mayor was actually he was an engineer. He wanted to tear things down and start over, and I'd say no, let's let's look at landmarking them. He'd say it's cheaper to start over, and I'd say only if you don't value the memories. So landmarkings was always important, and of course, when we cut the budget for education, the first thing that always goes is arts, music, and sports. And I would not sign a budget that cut art, music, and sports from our schools. And that $10 million that got restored um, has been since. So, what's my plan going forward? 20% affordable housing ordinance is where I'm going to begin the negotiation. We have to end the violence in our community, keep the city of Yonkers safe. That's with proper resources to our police. That whole defund the police movement was not a very well measured campaign, but we need programs like the snug campaign that Andre Stewart Cousins has been a big champion of, which is guns spelled backwards. It takes the guns off our streets, and it works with people that have served time in prison who'll go out and tell young men in particular about how bad it is in prison and why they should look for alternatives to violence. We need to create jobs for our Yonkers residents. All these film studios are great, but I was talking to a dry cleaner the other day who was complaining that how come they never use the Yonkers dry cleaner? They're still using the guy from Brooklyn to do their dry cleaning. And why are they bringing caterers and food trucks in from Manhattan when we have businesses in Yonkers? So we need to continue economic development, but make it so that more people work in Yonkers and more entrepreneurs get contracts. And we have to, make sure that the students get the education that they deserve. So that's my platform, and I hope I'll be out there going to debates, talking to people, going door to door, and earning their vote, because it's going to be a hard one to earn with all these other candidates. But I think that I am qualified to do the job.
Well, thank you for your time, Chuck, and best of luck. And that's it, folks. We are over and out.
Thank you so much, Ardina. Thank you for bringing the message to the people and educating the voter. As Cy Sims used to say about his furniture store, an educated consumer is our best customer.
I remember that. That's how old I am.
Right.
Okay. All right. Take care.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Bye bye.